Today, let's learn something about Chapter 13 Addiction. Drug abuse has been much in the news recently, with particular focus on the overprescription and subsequent abuse of opiates. All too often, this abuse results in overdose and even death. In a 6-day period in late August 2017, one city reported that 174 overdose cases flooded their hospital emergency rooms. The city is using the pharmaceutical industry as our countries in West Virginia, California, and New York. Addiction afflicts people around the world, often with chilling consequences. The National Institute on Drug Abuse estimated that the United States spent 700 billion each year on addiction-associated treatment, crimes, and lost productivity. Addiction is a chronic brain disorder that affects the body through physical and psychological dependence. Intentional, regular use of substances like opiates, alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs becomes an addiction when a person can no longer control his or her use despite negative consequences, such as loss of control and harm to themselves or others. One factor fueling addiction is tolerance. When a person's body becomes used to a drug and requires more of it to experience the same effect. Another facet of addiction is withdrawal. When lack of drug causes the body to react with unpleasant or life-threatening physical symptoms. This may range from moderate headaches or muscle pain to severe tremors or seizures. A combination of positive factors and negative ones helps to create an addiction. Cues or triggers, such as being in a place associated with drug or alcohol intake, or being around other drug or alcohol users, also provoke drug-taking behavior. It is important to realize that drug use does not always lead to addiction. Addiction is complex, and many researchers are working to understand the various interacting influences. Almost all abused drugs produce pleasure by activating a specific circuit of neurons, the brain's reward system, which is controlled mainly by the neurotransmitter dopamine. This brain region, called the limbic system, drives healthy behaviors such as eating and socializing, but it is also activated by drugs of abuse. The limbic system helps people experience emotion, which somewhat explains the mood or altering properties of many drugs. In addiction, the brain's reward system generated habits and learned behaviors. When a reward generated feelings of pleasure, we learn to repeat the actions and that lead to that reward. The first type of drug we called opioid. Dating back to prehistoric times, humans have consumed opioids by extracting opium from the juice of poppy flowers. The drug heroin is an opioid that is made by drying morphine, adding various chemicals, and then heating it until it evaporates and becomes a powder. When injected into a vein, heroin reaches the brain in 15 to 20 seconds. Once there, it is quickly converted back to morphine, which binds to opioid receptors, switching on the brain's reward system and flooding synapses with pleasure-inducing dopamine. The result is a brief rush of intense euphoria, followed by a few hours in a state of relaxed contentment. Opioid effects vary in stress, toxicity, safety, and how quickly they act. But why do our brains have opioid receptors? Our pituitary gland produces natural versions of opioids called endorphins, which help control motivation, emotion, food intake, and our response to pain. Laboratories produce synthetic opioid, which include heroin as well as prescription pain medicines like codeine, oxidine, and fentanyl, fentanyl, much more powerful than other opiates. Fentan- Fentanyl is used by doctors to treat severe pain. However, illegally made and distributed versions are sold on the black market and can be extremely dangerous. Opiates have many medically important uses, suppressing a cough, stopping diarrhea, and relieving pain. But in excess, they can cause breathing to stop. The usual cause of death is an overdose. And the most effective treatment of opioid overdose is an antidote-like approach using synthetic drugs that block opioid receptors. Two other drugs, methadone and buprenorphine, stimulate opioid receptors but produce a limited high. They also reduce withdrawal symptoms from other opiates. Both drugs have milder withdrawal symptoms of their own. And the second type of drug is nicotine. Nicotine is the addictive substance in tobacco. Within 10 seconds of smoking a cigarette, nicotine arrives in the brain. There it attaches to protein on nerve cells called nicotic acetylcholine receptors, triggering release of many neurotransmitters. It also releases neurotransmitters outside the brain. And in the brain, it creates a buzz of pleasure and energy due to release of dopamine, followed by a calming sensation and a rapid boost in attention and memory. The latter finding has led to ongoing tests of non-addictive nicotine-like substances as possible treatments for cognitive disorders, such as schizophrenia, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and Alzheimer's diseases. Tobacco is the leading cause of preventable death in the United States, accounting for approximately 90% of lung cancer deaths, 60% of lung diseases deaths, and 30% of deaths from heart disease. Despite the well-known health risks of tobacco use, however, about 20% of Americans still smoke. Nicotine itself does not cause cancer, but of the thousands of chemicals in tobacco, about 70 are known to be to be dangerous, and however, nicotine is responsible for other health risks of smoking, including heart diseases and stroke. Like many other addictive substances, nicotine generates tolerance. Over time, more and more nicotine is required to obtain the same effects. Also, like other drugs of abuse, nicotine activates dopamine-producing reward pathways that induce feelings of pleasure and affect motivation, creating the urge to use more. And one of the newest treatments of nicotine addiction is varenicline, approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration in 2006 for tobacco cessation treatments. This drug is a nicotine mimic that attaches to a special type of nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. One of that is thought to be responsible for conveying nicotine's addictive properties. The third type of drugs is alcohol. Alcohol, although legal like tobacco, is also addictive. Together, alcohol abuse and alcohol addiction are a serious and costly national health issue. Aside from secondary behavioral impacts such as drunken driving, sexual assault, and domestic violence, a primary chronic health problem is associated with alcohol addiction. Ethanol is addictive ingredient in alcoholic drinks. Has tricky effects on our bodies. Ethanol is water-soluble, so it easily enters the bloodstream and quickly travels to the brain. With just a drink or two, ethanol acts as a stimulant at higher blood levels. However, it acts as a depressant, causing intoxication, sleepiness, and even blackouts or short-term memory loss. Ethanol targets GABA receptors, which drive the brain's inhibitory system. In this capacity, ethanol calms anxiety, weakens muscles, and delays reaction time. Ethanol also blocks the NMDA type of glutamate receptors, which alter mood and impair memory, both common features of intoxication. And treatment of alcohol addiction include behavioral therapy, such as individual counseling, group therapy, and support groups. Some medications are used to treat alcohol addiction, and researchers can now use genetic testing to try to optimize therapy for individual drinkers. And the last type of drugs that we are going to introduce is called marijuana. It's also known as weed or pot. Marijuana comes from the dried leaves, flowers, stems, and seeds of cannabis plants. The plant contains the mind-altering chemical called THC, which distorts perception and alters a person's sense of time, space, and self. With the minute of smoking a marijuana joint, THC travels from the lungs to the blood and then into the brain. Eating foods containing THC can also create a high, usually within an hour of ingestion. Although the federal government deems marijuana illegal, in recent years several states have passed laws legalizing it. This has substantially increased documented recreational use of marijuana in the United States. Marijuana is not harmless. Neuroscientists have discovered that regular marijuana use is linked to abnormal biology in brain regions related to reward cravings and thought control. All are key players in addiction. Marijuana use during the 10 years can have long-lasting effects on thinking, memory, and learning. Although cannabis use disorders have been less studied than other addictions. Some known harms include higher stress levels due to covering and withdrawal, inability to think clearly, missing school or work, and risky behaviors while intoxicated. As with other addictions, heavy marijuana use seems to increase vulnerability to drug use in susceptible people through physical changes in the brain circuits of reward system. In some users, long-term marijuana use has been linked to schizophrenia. Our brain make a natural form of THC called anandamide, which acts through cannabinoid receptors in the body that help coordinate movement. This makes blind why people's driving is impaired after smoking marijuana. The hippocampus involved in memory and learning also contains many THC receptors, possibly explaining the effects of marijuana on short-term memory. While relatively little research has been conducted on the role and usefulness of marijuana in treating medical conditions, some studies suggest that another active compound in marijuana, called CBD, which does not produce a high, can control seizures, relieve pain and inflammation, and possibly even treat mental illness and addictions. Many people with PTSD self-medicated with marijuana to cope with anxiety, stress, and insomnia. And a few research studies appear to validate this strategy. These studies show that marijuana may reduce anxiety, improve sleep, and erase trauma-released memories in people with PTSD, but it is unknown whether it is due to CBD, THC, or some other ingredient. More research is needed to explore these findings. Similarly, marijuana has been widely regarded as a treatment for reducing nausea. And however, 2017 information from the NCI says there is currently too little evidence to recommend using cannabis to treat the side effects of cancer therapy. And this is what Magrela looks like. This is a picture of cannabis. And that's all about chapter 13.